Welcome to the Art Lady channel. Today I'm going to show you how I make these rubbing crayons for my students. Now I use them in my classroom, but you can also use them as rewards for students. And I want to show you some varieties that I've made over the years and what works and what doesn't work. If you look here, this has a little bit of a brownish gray wax on the back of them. And that's because when I made this crayon rubbing tool, I used part of crayons that were not Crayola crayons. They were cheap generic crayons, and what happens is then the cheaper wax tends to come to the top of the surface. So you want to always use Crayola crayons. And what I found also works is using oil pastels. And you can blend different percentages from, say, anywhere from 10% to 50% oil pastel, depending on the type of tool you're looking for. You might want a softer rubbing tool, or you might want a little bit harder rubbing tool. And what I do is I gently stir the oil pastel as it's cooling, because the oil pastel will tend to separate from the crayon, the wax crayon, but just gently stirring it as it's cooling helps to incorporate the oil pastel throughout the crayon tool. You'll just need a simple silicone mold in some fun shapes. And what I try and not use is molds that have, say, shapes that are very long and skinny, because when the kids are using them as a crayon tool, they tend to break. So kind of chunky shape molds. For example, these circle molds I really like. After you've peeled the crayons, I sort them into different colors and I get ready to place them in my molds. There are different ways to heat them. There are 3 methods that I know of to melt the wax. You can use your home oven. You place the silicone molds on a cookie tray, place them in the oven around 200 degrees, or as low as your oven can go. And just keep on watching them until they melt. You can also place them in the sun, especially if you're in the southern states. You place it on a cookie sheet, put it on or a large plastic tray like this, and you place it on the concrete surface and let that heat up over the day. If you're going to do that, you want to have a very thin layer of crayons first, let the bottom melt, and then keep on adding more crayons throughout the day. And this method does take longer, and it's my least preferred. My favorite method is actually using an embossing tool. It's a heat gun, and it just applies direct heat, and it melts it instantly. And I start with small layers, and that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to start filling up the crayon mold here. And what I'm going to do is I put just a small layer on one side of the crayon mold. You want to make sure that the crayons are all melted as much as they can in the mold. You don't want to have just partially melted crayons. So I started on one side, and the air from the heat gun is going to blow the melted wax into the spaces here that don't have crayons. And I keep on filling up. Throughout the melting process, I keep on placing the solid crayons on one side, and then the wax will flow into the other area as it's melting. And it doesn't take long for it to start to melt, which is nice. It's kind of a quick process. The total time takes just a few minutes to melt the whole thing. And in between molds, I let the heat gun cool down a bit, because I don't think that these heat guns are intended to run, I'm not sure, but for a long period of time. And you can see how it's kind of like lava flowing down. So I create a little hill, and then the wax crayon just flows down into the areas. So throughout the process, I'm going to just keep on adding to this area the solid crayon. And then, of course, it changes into the liquid form as it fills up the space. And I like to have a variety of colors You can choose whatever color combinations, of course, you want. I try and keep it colors next to each other on the color wheel, so we don't have a lot of, you know, browns, because if you mix two colors, you're going to end up with, if you mix complementary colors, you'll end up with a lot of brown crayons. So a lot of similar colors. Most of this does get mixed completely through. You can see I have some marbling going on now, but most of that kind of dissipates as it cools and mixes together. You do see some marbling a little bit on the back, at the bottom more so, when you take it out of the mold. And I'll show you on one as it's forming. But this is how I do the technique with the crayons here, with the heat gun. If I do it in the oven, I just pile them all up real high, because the spaces in between the crayons, if you have too much space, what'll happen is in the oven, it just makes about a half a thickness of a crayon rubbing. And if it's not thick enough, when the kids use it, they break. So I mound them up a lot higher when I use the actual oven method. But this method I find I like the best, because I can do it right at school and I'm not bringing stuff home. I haven't asked the cafeteria yet if they will heat them up in their heating ovens, because they have these like warming ovens that heat up to 200, I think it's 200 or 250 or something. But I know it's a low temp warming oven they have. But because it leaves a smell, I haven't asked them. I noticed it's a couple days in my own home oven that it leaves the smell. And I have a new oven, so I don't want to bring it into my home. But there's the melting process. And you notice this is the area I keep on putting just in this area, and then my color gets displaced into the other areas. And I do this not quite full. I leave about probably 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch, more like 1/4 of an inch from the top. Just a little bit above 1/4 of an inch I leave from the top, because it ends up splashing everywhere. I've got some real cool marbling right here. If you leave a lot of solid crayons in here, it will harden and form one solid object. But what happens is when the kids use it, sometimes it makes it a weak crayon rubbing tool, and the crayons just break. It'll just break. So I want a nice solid tool for the kids to use, especially if you're using these fun shapes. Now, I have a lot of circle shapes that I use, and then I also use heart shapes, because I find that when I use them in the classroom, those shapes last longer. When you have these fun shapes that have small appendages coming off, oftentimes they break. And I want something that's going to last a while in my classroom. But these are fun shapes that the kids like as a prize, a bonus prize, or a giveaway. And it costs you pretty much nothing, because the crayons you're going to just throw away, or people will throw away anyways. I get bags and bags of these crayons at the end of the school year from the classroom teachers, and we put them to good use. Okay, this is, actually it's a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch from the top, so I'm going to stop now, just a hair bigger. Now, if you want, you can leave it. Let me shut this off. You can leave it like this, or you can go ahead and just do a fun marble throughout with a contrasting color. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to take a purple. Let me get a bigger one. I'll grab this blue. And I'm just going to melt this. I'm holding the blue. And I'm just going to melt in a little bit of this blue just to give some fun marble color. And then I'm going to shut it off, and then I'll just give it a little stir with the blue so it has a pretty little marbling on the top of that. And now I'm going to let that dry flat. And I'll show you what they look like when I take them out. Now I'm going to show you how to take it out of the mold. You simply just pull the sides and pop it out. You want to wait, of course, until it's solid and cooled. These are slightly warm, and that's when I like to take them out, but cool enough so that they keep their shape. That way I can smooth out the back, because the back tends to have a little bit of a raised edge. But you can see the marbling is nicely placed throughout the color, throughout the shape. Here's the one I did on the video. They just pop right out with these silicone molds. And this one has some nice marbling. I like to use the white. It adds a nice effect to the color. And then, of course, that blue just makes it pretty on the back. But you can see how the edges were raised up a bit on that one. As it dries, it kind of shrinks down a little bit, so it makes the edges raised up a little bit. This one was a little soft as I'm taking it out. So the back got a little smushed from my thumb. Now I'm going to show you how to fix the back edge. I like to make it smooth, so I just simply rub it real hard on a scrap piece of paper, and it just files down the back edges. Right there. That way if you're doing flat rubbings, it will be smooth for you to do your rubbings with. Here's one I did a little bit earlier. And they make a fun little gift. Or like I do in my classroom, we go on crayon rubbing hikes around the school and do some fun rubbings. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to support it, I want to thank my patrons who do support my channel. Just click on the title and it'll take you to my Patreon account. I also have a Teacher Pay Teacher site. It's called the Art Ladies Store on TPT, and you can support me there as well. Thank you, and again, enjoy your rubbings.